Wonderful. Well, thank you everyone for joining. My name is Jennifer Sharpie. I'm the Executive Director of the Colorado Foundation for Agriculture. We do the Agriculture in the Classroom program. So we reach students K through 12 across Colorado and help them understand their connection to their food, fiber, fuel, and natural resources. Because I think, as everyone on this group knows, everything that we use every day comes from agriculture, whether it's the table or your desk that you're working from, your clothing, the food you eat, the paper you write on, everything comes from agriculture. I kind of have introduced everybody here, and Jenny has chimed in, Jenny Bennett from CSU, so I think we're good that way. I do want to take a minute to thank our sponsors of this program. The book itself was done in a partnership with the Bessie Minor Swift Foundation on behalf of the Fence Post. And our book author and the illustrator both work for the Fence Post. And then we have the Farm Bureau, Colorado Farm Bureau Women's Leadership Committee, the Colorado Cattlewomen, Bank of Colorado, and then various individual sponsors. And we'll spotlight Jerry, introduce Senator Sonnenberg. There we go. And Jerry, if you would like to go ahead and introduce yourself and talk about your connection to agriculture.
Well, thank you, Jennifer, and it's great to be with you today. And I'm excited. Colorado Foundation for Agriculture has had a close spot to my heart for a number of years. Actually, interestingly enough, my lovely wife, who is a school teacher, used to be on the board of the foundation years ago. So indeed, they do great work, and I'm excited to be a part of it. Simply because I am indeed a farmer and rancher and have been a farmer and rancher my entire life. I actually live in the same house that both my father and I were raised in, and I raised my children in that house as well. So staying on the land and taking care of the land has always been important to me. So I'm excited to be a part of this and celebrate National Ag Week and Ag Day by reading this incredible book by Miss Gable. Love her to death and all the work she does for agriculture. So I'm excited to be with you today. Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry. Let's go ahead. We'll introduce our book. It's called Still Good, The Faces of Family Agriculture. And this is a brand new book. It was published late December, early January of this year. And the story is about a little boy and his grandpa. And the little boy finds his grandpa's old photo album with photos from the 1950s. And the grandpa tells the little boy stories about these photos. And one thing that I think is interesting is, as you look through the book, or as we go through the book and look at the photos, they're all in black and white, the old photos. The quality isn't what we would normally think of as being quality, because technology, or photograph technology back then, is not near what it is today. And then the boy has this great idea to find out what agriculture is like today. So he gets photos and stories from farmers and ranchers across Colorado who are currently in production, and new photos, and they compare and contrast those 2 years. So as you're listening to Jerry read the book, think about questions that you might have about agriculture, about the two different eras, as we compare it to 70 years ago in the 1950s. And throughout the book, we'll realize that agriculture has changed, but it is in fact still good. All right.
Excellent. Well, the leather photo album cracked as the boy opened it, sending dust swirling into the light from the attic window. Out in the yard, he could see milling around the corn, dancing in the street. He flipped to a yellowing page with a black and white photo. Below it, someone had neatly written, "The Boys and Patsy, 1950." He turned to another photo and another before deciding he needed to know more. He knew exactly who would know more. He opened the screen door to the farmhouse and it groaned. He stepped on the porch and the old dog and the old boards groaned. A quilt flapped in the breeze on the clothesline. The boy sat down on the porch swing beside his grandfather, who was oiling the shovel handle. He looked over and saw the book in the boy's lap. I haven't seen that book for a while, Grandpa said. Farming sure is different now than it was. They opened the book to the photo of the boys and the milk cow. The older boy was hunkered on a little stool milking a cow. The younger boy had his thumbs hooked in the straps of his overalls, a dog near his feet. "Oh, Patsy," Grandpa said, pulling the book and the boy closer. "We always had a milk cow around. She was a shorthorn. I used to weigh every bucket of milk to fill 10-gallon cans. We would sell those cans and my dad would give me a few cents for the milk check. That was back when even a few cents could buy something." The boy turned the page to the photo of the long-legged boy standing next to a man with a weathered hat in front of an old tractor. Grandpa looked at the photo and leaned back in his chair. The old tractor could really run, he said. It was hot on that metal seat in the summer, and there was no heat when it was cold. That tractor is still out in the barn. Maybe I'll teach you to drive it sometime. They could sure use, or they could sure build things to last. The next photo was of a young boy standing proudly next to a steer. Grandpa studied the photo and sat back in his chair, tipping his straw hat back on his head and taking a long drink of tea. At his feet, the dog sighed. "That boy, not much older than you, was me," he said. "I took that Hereford steer to the fair and won a blue ribbon. That fall, I led the steer down the alley at the Denver Union Stockyards. The buyers would all sit on the wooden fence rails that lined the alleys. I stood up straight and led that steer, hoping those buyers would bid. I couldn't understand the auctioneer's chant. That's what it's called when they talk so quickly, but they sure seem to. Grandpa turned another page to a photo of a young woman in a dress behind rows of pumpkins and baskets filled with apples and zucchini, potatoes, onions, watermelons, and peppers. "This is your grandma when she was young," he said. "Her dad farmed and it took him and the boys all summer to irrigate the produce. It was like watering our garden, but they did it for entire fields. Each morning, your grandma would drive the old pickup to the farm stand where she would sell the produce they grew. That's where I met her. I ate a lot of the vegetables that summer looking for excuses to see her." He paused and smiled at the photo. "This was back when farmers irrigated with shovels and set tubes by hand," he said. "There were no pivot sprinklers. It was back when irrigating was a full-time job all by myself. You couldn't buy fruits and vegetables anytime you wanted. They were available when they were in season, and people stored them in the root cellars or put them up in glass canning jars, like Grandma does with her dilled green beans and jellies." The boy smiled at the mention of Grandma's jars of green beans. They were his favorite. He turned the page. The photo was of a young man trailing sheep through a small town. A horse pulled a round-topped herder's wagon behind the ewes, and dogs and kids on horseback were on all sides. That family has been raising sheep near Meeker for nearly 100 years, he said. They took them high in the summer and brought them back down in the fall. Herders stayed with the sheep and protected them from bears and wolves and mountain lions and kept them together and safe. It takes a lot of work to raise lambs, but I'm glad people still do it. The boy thought about wool socks in the winter and Grandma's lamb chops at Easter. Me too, the boy said. We bought a lamb from them every year for as long as I can remember, Grandpa said. We always knew where our meat came from, raised either on our farm or a neighbor's. When this photo was taken, there weren't refrigerated trucks to haul meat across the country. The next photo was a handsome young man standing beside a small airplane. Who is that, Grandpa? Well, son, that's me, he said. You were a pilot? The boy was sitting up straight now, eager to hear more. Grandpa scratched the dog that was now inching closer to him in search of a cool breeze. Yep, he said. You know how the yellow airplanes spray the neighbors' fields? Oh, the boy nodded. Well, I used to do that, he said. I'd fly low, buzzing the fields for the farmers who had hired me. I learned to fly in the war, so when I came home, I figured out a way to get back in the air. It wasn't dangerous, and still is, but it was a thrill and an important job. When I flew near our farm, I would waggle my wings back and forth to say hello to your grandma. As summer turned to fall, the boy returned to school, though he thought he would learn more on the porch with Grandpa and helping water the garden and fixing the old tractor and checking the cows than he did at the desk. The boy had asked to borrow the leather book and had carried it home carefully, protecting it like it contained treasures and knowing it did indeed. As he stepped into his own house, he had an idea. After school, the boy did his chores, ate dinner, and sat at the kitchen table, neatly writing letters and folding them into an envelope, which he put in the mailbox at the end of the drive as he waited for the bus. Each day, he hustled off the school bus and checked the mailbox. He flipped through the bills and catalogs for seed, bulls, and tractors. Finally, one day, there was an envelope with his name on it. 5 more envelopes slowly arrived, and he sat at the kitchen table with the leather book open and worked as his mother moved about the kitchen and as the ag news played on the television. It was Friday when he carried the leather album down the driveway to his grandpa's porch. A quilt was drying on the line, dancing in the wind, dancing as the wind blew it. The dog and the old man stood, watched the boy run towards them. He bounded up the stairs and held the leather book out to his grandpa. Take a look, he told Grandpa, his heart beating fast from running in anticipation. Grandpa opened the book and saw again the photo of the 2 boys and a roan milk cow. On the facing page, the boy had carefully placed a color photo of a Holstein cows in a spotless milking barn. The stainless steel gleamed and the 2 men walked alongside the cows, ensuring that the robotic milker cups attached correctly. Well, I'll be, Grandpa said, studying the photo. Where did you find this? I wrote a letter to the family who owns Chapin Family Dairies, asking for a photo of them milking cows, he asked. Mr. Chapin told me the robots milk the cows and test the milk, and they are able to safely milk more cows and make sure the milk is clean and the cows feel good. It only takes a few people to milk a lot of cows. Robots. I'll be darned, Grandpa said. They even have a robot to push the feed close to the cows so it's always there and fresh. And big tanker trucks pick up milk every day, the boy said. Dairy farming is different now than it was when you milked Patsy, but it's still good. Grandpa turned the page on the photo of the long-legged boy standing by the tractor. On the facing page were two men, father and son, in front of a combine and tractor hooked to a disc. Behind them, Grandpa could see a center pivot sprinkler against the blue sky. That is Mark Arnish and his dad, the boy said. They came from Germany to grow sugar beets in 1951, but now they grow wheat and they have a third generation working with them too. Grandpa held the book close, studying the modern combine and tractor, and he smiled when he looked back at the black and white photo, remembering the little red tractor. Much different than what we had, he said. Different, but still good. The next page was a photo of Grandpa as a boy and his Hereford steer. Next to it, the boy had taped a photo of an auctioneer in a crisp shirt and evenly creased hat, leaning close to the microphone with his hand pointed to the crowd, calling bids. In the ring was a fancy set of Hereford heifers. Next to the auctioneer sat two people with cell phones and computer screens in front of them. Ms. Robin at Livestock Exchange sent me this photo when I wrote to her, the boy said. He pointed to the computer. That's how people at home can buy cattle on their computer or phone, he said. Grandpa grinned and said he never had heard of such a thing. They still chant and take bids, and Ms. Robin said they still serve cherry pie, and it's really good, the boy said. Grandpa smiled when he turned the page to the photo of Grandma as a girl. Next to it was a photo of a young woman in shorts and a t-shirt, leaning on a crate of cantaloupes. Ms. Gail Knapp sent me this photo, the boy said. They've been selling produce at the farm stand for over 30 years. Their melons are trucked to grocery stores to several states because they produce more than they can sell at their stand. And not everyone who wants to buy their produce can come to their farm. They have Rocky Ford cantaloupes and watermelon, peppers that tumble in a roaster over a flame, sweet corn, okra, onions, potatoes, peaches, and jars of apple butter. Mrs. Knapp said the apple butter they sell is made exactly to my grandma's famous recipe, and it's the best around. They both knew that was one of those things that hadn't changed and was still good. On the last page was the photo of the sheep trotting towards town. On the facing page was a new color photo of a young boy following the sheep through the same small town. That is Ari Theos, the boy said. He is the 5th generation of sheep producers on the ranch. They still trail ewes like they did when his grandpa was his age. Some things change only a little and are still good. Grandpa smiled and sat back in his chair with the leather book closed on his lap. Together, the two looked over the farm and thought of the farms just beyond their view, with pivot irrigation, big tractors, and the setting sun, knowing it was different, but was still good. The end. Isn't that a wonderful, wonderful story? While we're waiting on others to respond or ask a question, I will tell you, I give it a fancy thumbs up. It is incredible. Rachel Gable, who does an incredible job just being a spokesperson for agriculture, has done a phenomenal job of recapping family farms and how it is much different now than it was. Tractors and combines driving themselves with GPS and computers The robots at Chapin Dairy are just incredible. I've had the opportunity to go out to the Chapin Dairy and visit with Foy and Cindy and watch how they work. It's just incredible how technology has made agriculture ability to produce more food with less inputs, because as you know, our population continues to grow worldwide and agriculture continues to find ways to meet those food needs to feed the world.